December 2024, a federal courthouse. For nearly a century, McKinsey Company had been the gold standard. The pristine advisors to presidents, the whisperers to CEOs, the smartest guys in every room. They were untouchable. They were the ones who wrote the rules. But on this day, the Department of Justice wasn't asking for advice. They were handing down an indictment. The charge? Conspiracy to defraud the United States. The payout? $650 million to settle criminal and civil investigations. It was a humiliation unprecedented in the history of management consulting. But here is the terrifying part. That massive fine? For McKinsey, it was barely a rounding error. It was just the cost of doing business. While the headlines screamed about their role in turbocharging the opioid crisis, the firm was already busy reshaping the economies of authoritarian regimes and advising the very regulators supposed to watch them. This isn't just a story about bad advice. It is a story about a shadow government that operates without votes, without transparency, and until very recently, without consequences. Welcome to the Capital Curriculum. To understand how the world actually works, you have to look past the people making the speeches. You have to look at the people writing the slides. McKinsey doesn't own assets. They don't drill for oil like Exxon, they don't hold deposits like JP Morgan, and they don't manufacture missiles like Raytheon. Yet they are deeply embedded inside all three. They are a ghost in the global machine. Operating in over 130 cities, their consultants, often young, brilliant Ivy League graduates, are dropped behind enemy lines, or rather, client lines. They sit in the offices of state-owned enterprises in China. They advise the Ministry of Defense in Saudi Arabia. They restructure the National Health Service in Britain. Their product is legitimacy. When a CEO wants to fire 10,000 people, they hire McKinsey to produce a report saying it is strategic optimization. When a dictator wants to rebrand his regime, they hire McKinsey to draft a Vision 2030. But as we are about to see, this influence comes with a body count. Before we get to the opioids and the dictators, we have to understand the religion. And make no mistake, McKinsey is a religion. It starts in 1926, but the real architect is a man named Marvin Bower. He didn't want to run a business, he wanted to build a priesthood. Bower enforced a code that was almost military: dark suits, white shirts, over-the-calf socks so no skin would show when you crossed your legs. But the most important rule was silence. You never talk about the client. This created an aura of mystery. If you hired McKinsey, you weren't just hiring a consultant, you were accessing a secret vault of global best practices. They sold the idea that management was a science, a solvable equation. They believed that a smart generalist with a spreadsheet could solve problems better than a veteran with 30 years of experience. This hubris, this absolute certainty in the power of raw intelligence over operational reality, is the DNA of every disaster we are about to discuss. So, how do they actually make money? They sell the engagement. Imagine you are a CEO facing a falling stock price. You are panicked. You hire McKinsey. A team of 20-something analysts arrives. They interview your staff, they crunch your data, and 3 months later, they present the deck. This PowerPoint presentation is the most dangerous weapon in modern capitalism. Why? Because it divorces strategy from execution. McKinsey provides the what: cut costs, boost sales, enter this market. But they rarely stay for the how. If the plan fails, the CEO says, "We just implemented McKinsey's recommendation." If the plan succeeds, McKinsey takes the credit. It is a perfect mechanism for transferring liability. The consultants get their fees up front, often millions of dollars a month, while the consequences, the layoffs, the safety shortcuts, the failed mergers, happen long after the consultants have flown business class to their next client. They sell confidence to insecure leaders. And in the late 1990s, they found the most insecure, ambitious leader of them all. Before we look at the Enron disaster, we have to look at the revolving door. McKinsey isn't just a firm. It is a finishing school for the global elite. They have a policy called up or out. If you aren't promoted to partner, you are gently pushed out the door. But not to the unemployment line. You are pushed into executive roles at the firm's clients. This creates a loyal alumni network that rivals the Skull and Bones. Former McKinsey consultants run Google, leading banks, and government agencies. This is the secret sauce. When a former McKinsey consultant becomes a CEO, who is the first person they call for advice? Their old firm. It is a self-perpetuating ecosystem of influence. And in Houston, Texas, a former McKinsey partner named Jeffrey Skilling took over an energy company called Enron. He didn't just hire McKinsey, he turned Enron into a carbon copy of McKinsey. He brought the talent mindset to the energy sector, and it was a match made in hell. Enron was McKinsey's flagship success story. Until it wasn't. The firm earned tens of millions advising Enron. They championed Skilling's asset-light strategy. They validated the idea that Enron didn't need to own power plants, it just needed to trade the contracts. It was pure abstraction. When Enron collapsed in 2001, wiping out billions in pensions and sending executives to prison, McKinsey was surprisingly quiet. They insisted they only advised on strategy, not the accounting fraud. Technically, true, but they had provided the intellectual justification for the House of Cards. They helped design the complex, opaque corporate structure that made the fraud possible. Enron was the warning shot. It showed what happens when you prioritise theoretical value over tangible reality. But instead of being exiled, McKinsey grew. They realised that if they could survive Enron, they could survive anything. And they were right. Because while the US economy was recovering, McKinsey was looking for a new growth engine. They found it in a little pill called OxyContin. Fast forward to 2009. The scene is a boardroom at Purdue Pharma. The company is in trouble. Their blockbuster drug, OxyContin, is facing headwinds. Regulators are sniffing around. Sales are flattening. People are dying. A moral company would pull back. Purdue hired McKinsey. The internal project name? Project Turbocharge. You cannot make this up. The goal wasn't just to maintain sales, it was to radically accelerate them in the face of a public health crisis. The McKinsey team didn't look at patients as people in pain. They looked at them as units of consumption. They looked at doctors not as healers, but as distribution nodes. And the data showed a problem. Too many doctors were becoming cautious. They were lowering doses. McKinsey's job was to fix that leakage. They needed to find a way to make doctors write more scripts for higher doses for longer periods. And they brought the full force of their analytical genius to solve it. Here is the mechanism they built. It was a masterpiece of data science. McKinsey analysed prescription records to identify what they called high-value prescribers. In any other business, this is just customer segmentation. In the opioid business, a high-value prescriber is often a doctor running a pill mill. These were doctors writing huge volumes of dangerous prescriptions. Instead of flagging them for compliance, McKinsey advised Purdue to double down on them. They told Purdue to increase the number of sales reps visiting these specific doctors. They even modelled the exact lift in prescription volume they could expect from each additional sales call. They treated OxyContin exactly like a bag of chips or a software subscription. But they went further. When pharmacy chains like Walgreens started implementing safety protocols to stop addicts from getting pills, McKinsey advised Purdue on how to lobby these chains to loosen their restrictions. They called it countering emotional messages, code for ignoring the mothers crying at town halls. They actively engineered a system to bypass safety checks. It gets worse. In one of the most chilling documents uncovered by investigators, McKinsey consultants proposed a novel idea. They knew that insurance companies were hesitant to pay for OxyContin because of the cost of treating addiction and overdoses. So, McKinsey suggested a rebate model. Purdue would pay a rebate to insurance companies for every event, an event being a patient overdosing. Think about that for a second. They were essentially assigning a price tag to an overdose and building it into the business model as a customer service feature. If our product nearly kills your customer, we will give you a discount. This wasn't just cold capitalism, it was sociopathic. And this wasn't done by rogue agents. These presentations went to the senior leadership. Years later, when the heat turned up, a senior McKinsey partner sent a frantic email to a colleague. Delete all our documents. But digital forensics is a stubborn thing. They thought they had wiped the server. They hadn't. The result of Project Turbocharge was exactly what McKinsey promised. Sales went up, Purdue made billions. But the cost was catastrophic. The opioid epidemic killed over 500,000 Americans. Communities in Appalachia and the Rust Belt were hollowed out. And for years, McKinsey stayed in the shadows. Purdue took the blame. The Sackler family took the heat. But behind them, pulling the strings of the strategy, was the firm. It wasn't until 2021 that the wall of silence cracked. McKinsey agreed to pay $573 million to 47 states. In 2024, another $650 million followed in federal penalties. They admitted no wrongdoing in the civil settlements, a standard legal fiction, but the apology tour began. Their global managing partner issued a statement of deep regret. But while they were apologizing in America, their best consultants were already thousands of miles away, working on a very different project. If Purdue was about exploiting pain, their next venture was about exploiting power. Shift your focus to the Xinjiang province in China. Just a few miles away from detention camps where 1 million Uyghurs were being held, McKinsey held a corporate retreat. They rode camels. They stayed in luxury tents. It was a celebration of their massive footprint in China. This image, consultants snapping selfies in the shadow of a human rights atrocity, encapsulates their work with authoritarian regimes. While the opioid crisis was a domestic scandal, McKinsey's international work is a geopolitical one. They have served the Kremlin, the Chinese Communist Party's state-owned enterprises, and the absolute monarchy of Saudi Arabia. Why? Because autocrats are the perfect clients. They have massive sovereign wealth funds, they can implement strategic changes without worrying about unions or voters, and they pay in cash. McKinsey doesn't just offer them business advice, they offer them modernization. They help dictatorships upgrade their operating systems to be more efficient, more profitable, and more durable. In Saudi Arabia, McKinsey was deeply embedded in the Ministry of Planning. They helped design Vision 2030, the kingdom's plan to move beyond oil. That sounds benign, but in an absolute monarchy, economic policy is security policy. In 2015, McKinsey produced a report measuring public sentiment towards the government's economic austerity measures. It wasn't just a poll. They used data mining to identify the most influential voices on Twitter driving the conversation. The report specifically named 3 critics. It was a slide deck on influencer engagement. But when you hand a list of critics to a security state, it becomes a hit list. Shortly after, one of those men was arrested. Another reported that his phone was hacked and his brothers were imprisoned. McKinsey was horrified, claiming the report was an internal document never intended for targeting. But this is the mechanism. They bring Silicon Valley analytics to medieval court politics. They provide the tools of surveillance capitalism to regimes that use them for actual surveillance. Why do the consultants do it? Talk to young McKinsey associates and they will tell you they are liberalising these countries from the inside. They argue that by helping Saudi Arabia diversify its economy, they are creating jobs for women and modernising society. It is a seductive lie. It allows a 26-year-old Harvard grad to sit in Riyadh and feel like a diplomat. But in reality, they are mercenaries of the status quo. By making state-owned oil companies more efficient, they aren't liberalising the regime, they are funding it. By helping China's state-owned enterprises expand globally, they are strengthening the geopolitical rivals of their own home countries. The Business and Human Rights Resource Centre tracked their work. From helping raise the stature of corrupt governments in South Africa, to burnishing the image of the Kremlin before the Ukraine war. The human element here is willful blindness. They focus on the spreadsheet so they don't have to look at the jail cell. The term for this is state capture. And nowhere was this clearer than in South Africa. This is a story that often gets missed in the US press, but it is vital. In the mid-2010s, McKinsey worked with the state power utility Eskom. To get the contract, they partnered with a local firm called Trillian. Trillian was linked to the Gupta family, who were accused of practically running the South African government through corruption. McKinsey ramped up fees, charging tens of millions for turnaround strategies, while the power grid literally fell apart. The scandal was massive. It wasn't just bad advice, it was looting. McKinsey eventually paid back the fees and apologised, admitting they violated their own professional standards. But the damage was done. The lights in Johannesburg still go out. This is the global consequence of the shadow consultant. They extract wealth from fragile states under the guise of expertise, leaving behind hollowed-out institutions and well-formatted PDFs. But if you think opioids and autocrats are the past, look at the climate crisis. This is the next frontier of the conflict. Publicly, McKinsey is a champion of sustainability. They publish glossy reports on the green transition. They advise the UN at COP summits. They tell CEOs that net zero is a strategic imperative. The illusion is perfect. They position themselves as the saviours of the planet. But look at the client list. At the exact same time, they advise 43 of the world's top 100 high-polluting companies. They work with major oil and gas giants, helping them maximise extraction efficiency. It is the ultimate hedge. They get paid to help the polluters pollute more efficiently, and they get paid to help the victims clean it up. In internal documents, some McKinsey partners have pushed back, asking if the firm is serving the wrong clients. But the revenue speaks louder. The brown revenue, money from fossil fuels, is massive. How do they reconcile this? Through complex accounting and scope definitions. In the corporate world, carbon emissions are categorized. Scope 1 is what you burn. Scope 2 is the electricity you buy. Scope 3 is everything else, including what happens when customers use your product. McKinsey helps oil clients optimize their operations to reduce Scope 1 and 2. They make the drilling rig more energy efficient. They put solar panels on the refinery. This allows the oil company to claim they are reducing emissions. But they ignore Scope 3, the oil actually being burned in cars and factories, which is 90% of the problem. McKinsey provides the intellectual framework for greenwashing. They create the metrics that allow a coal company to look like an ESG leader. It is the same mechanism as Enron. Manipulate the definitions of value, or in this case harm, until the ledger looks clean. They aren't solving climate change, they are consulting it to death. This double game is causing cracks in the monolith. For the first time in history, we are seeing significant leaks from inside McKinsey. In 2021, over 1,100 McKinsey employees signed an open letter to the partners, demanding the firm reveal how much carbon its clients emit. This was a mutiny. The Catholic Church of Strategy was facing a reformation. Junior consultants, who joined to change the world, realized they were helping Exxon drill deeper. The leadership's response was classic McKinsey. They formed a committee. They promised client selection frameworks. But the whistleblowers know the truth. The partnership model requires growth, and the biggest checks still come from the dirtiest industries. The human element here is cognitive dissonance. The smartest young people in the world are realizing they are the bad guys. The consequence of this all-sides consulting is delay. By helping fossil fuel giants navigate regulations and improve their public image, McKinsey helps extend the life of the fossil fuel era. Every year of delay is worth trillions of dollars to their clients. Just like they helped Purdue delay strict opioid regulation by countering emotional messages, they help polluters delay strict carbon taxes by proposing voluntary market mechanisms. They turn existential threats into management problems. And management problems, by definition, never need to be solved. They just need to be managed. Forever. For a fee. This is the danger. It's not that McKinsey wants the world to burn. It's that they are indifferent to the fire as long as they are paid to measure the temperature. When the scandals break, opioids, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, McKinsey deploys its own defense mechanism. They don't just hire lawyers, they hire the best crisis managers in the world. Their strategy is containment. First, they deny. They claim the advice was misinterpreted. Then they contextualize. We were just offering options. Finally, when cornered by subpoenas, they settle. But notice the language of the settlements. They almost never admit liability. They admit regret. They admit falling short of standards. This legalistic wordplay is crucial. It protects the brand. It allows them to tell future clients, "We learned from that." After the opioid settlement, they replaced their global managing partner. They issued a new code of conduct. They promised more rigorous client screening. It was a beautiful presentation, a perfect slide deck on organizational reform. But has the underlying business model changed? Not one bit. How do they survive billions in fines? Structural leverage. McKinsey is a private partnership. They don't have public shareholders. They don't have quarterly earnings calls where analysts can grill them. They are a black box. The $650 million opioid fine? The partners pay it out of their profits. Since the firm generates over $15 billion a year in revenue, that fine is painful, but manageable. It's the equivalent of a speeding ticket for a billionaire. Furthermore, the contracts they sign with clients contain intense indemnity clauses. And remember the advice loophole. In the eyes of the law, telling someone to commit a crime is different than pulling the trigger. The DOJ had to work incredibly hard to frame the opioid case as a criminal conspiracy. It was a rare pierce of the corporate veil. Usually, the shield holds. The consultants are just advisors. The executives are the deciders. The advisors walk away, the deciders go to jail. Consider Bob Sternfels, the global managing partner during the recent turbulence. His job wasn't to change the firm, it was to preserve it. In internal town halls, the message wasn't, "We are evil," it was, "We are misunderstood." The culture of the firm is incredibly resilient because it is based on elitism. They truly believe they are smarter than their critics. When the New York Times publishes an investigation, the partners don't see it as a moral reckoning. They see it as a PR problem to be optimized. The partners who worked on the opioid accounts? Some left. Some retired with their millions. Few faced personal ruin. The institution protects the individual so that the individual will protect the institution. It is a classic omerta. So, did the scandals stop them? No. In fact, McKinsey is growing. Governments facing post-COVID inflation are hiring them. The Pentagon is hiring them for AI strategy. The Saudis are hiring them for their new megacities. The settlements were a cleansing fire. By paying the fines, they bought a clean slate. The irony is tragic. The very governments that fined McKinsey for the opioid crisis are hiring McKinsey to help them manage the public health response. They are playing both sides of the chessboard. They help break the system, and then they sell their services to fix it. This is the ultimate consequence of the cover-up: normalization. We have accepted that there is a class of shadow consultants who run the world's operating system, accountable to no one but their own partnership agreement. We are now entering the next chapter, and it is the most dangerous one yet: artificial intelligence. Who is advising the world's governments on how to regulate AI? Who is advising the tech giants on how to monetize it? McKinsey. They are currently producing thousands of pages of reports on generative AI. They are defining the framework for the future of labour. Just as they told Enron to commoditize energy and Purdue to commoditize pain, they are now telling the world how to commoditize intelligence. The risks here are not just financial or medical, they are existential. If their advice on AI is as flawed as their advice on opioids, we're in trouble. But because they speak the language of optimization and efficiency, they are the ones writing the roadmap. McKinsey's power ultimately comes from a monopoly on knowledge. They aggregate data from every client they serve. When they advise a bank in London, they use insights they learned from a bank in Tokyo. They know more about the global economy than any single government. This knowledge grid is their moat. No regulator can match their view of the board. They are the only ones who can see the whole picture. This makes them indispensable. Even if you hate them, you hire them, because you are terrified that your competitor is hiring them. It is a prisoner's dilemma where McKinsey is the jailer. They have positioned themselves as the gatekeepers of the future. You cannot cross the bridge to the 21st century without paying the toll. Where does that leave us? Where does that leave you? You might not work for a Fortune 500 company. You might not be a Saudi prince. But you live in the world McKinsey is building. When your hospital cuts nursing staff to optimize ratios, that's the McKinsey touch. When your electricity bill spikes because of market liberalizations, that's the McKinsey framework. When your data is sold to advertisers, that's the McKinsey model. You are the end user of their advice. The high-value prescriber strategy treated patients as stats. The Vision 2030 strategy treated citizens as obstacles. The pattern is clear. In the pursuit of pure efficiency, humanity is often a friction cost to be eliminated. The criminal charges in 2024 were a victory, but a small one. The shadow consultants are not going away. They are shape-shifting. They are moving into AI, into defence, into climate engineering. They are the invisible hand that guides the visible hands of power. And as long as we prioritise profit over people and efficiency over ethics, there will always be a market for what McKinsey sells. The firm isn't the disease, it's the symptom. It is the perfect reflection of a global system that rewards the extraction of value above all else. Do not be fooled by the apologies. Do not be fooled by the settlements. The slide deck is still being written. The next strategy is already being implemented, and chances are you won't know about it until it's too late. History shows us that the most dangerous advice is the kind you don't hear until the bill comes due. Stay watching, because the next investigation isn't about a consultancy. It's about the central banks that enable them